Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a bit late with this video and this read-through. I've been looking forward to it for a long time. First off, if you want to support me and to push me to continue doing these types of videos, please join me on my Patreon page. That's one way to support me, or just leave your feedback. Even you just watching is means a great deal to me. So either way, let's jump into it. The last time we read Aurelian Sol's biography and also his lore. I know very little about the lore, and I'm taking everything piece by piece, but this is tied to the void, I imagine, where Icathia once stood. There was some mentioning of the void and how Aurelian Sol used his powers, even though he is under the control of Targon. He still used his powers to defeat the void. Aurelian Sol being such a powerful entity, it was definitely a good place to start. But there's many pieces of the story that we need to get to understand the beginning. There was some mentioning of the void. I was considering also doing Vel'Koz as a story, but we will start here because Graham McNell is a genius in terms of writing. So I think this will be very enjoyable. So here goes nothing, where Icathia once stood. Of course, my pronunciation will not be perfect because I haven't heard anyone explicitly say this, where Icathia once stood. So I'm going to just pronounce them the way I imagine them being pronounced. And the final thing that I will mention before we jump into it is that this will be on Spotify as just just a read through that you can listen to. Will be on YouTube too, and a bunch of other stuff. I don't remember the platforms. We'll figure it out as we go. Okay. Where Icathia Once Stood by Graham McNeil. I missed the E the first time. McNeil. All right. My name is Aksamuk Varchoy Kuhari Icathor. Aksamuk was my grandsire's name, a warrior's name. It means keeper of edges, and it's an auspicious title to bear. Aksamuk was the last of the Mage Kings, the final ruler to fall before the Shuriman Sun Empress when she led her golden host of men and gods into the kingdom of Icathia. Var is my mother, and Choi my father. Icathor is the name of the blood-bonded clan to which I was born, one with an honorable history of service to the Mage Kings. I have borne these names since birth. My name is Aksamuk Varchoy Kohari Icathor. Only Kohari is a new addition. The fit is new, but already feels natural. The name is now part of me, and I bear it with a pride that burns bright in my heart. The Kohari were once the life wards of the Mage Kings, deadly warriors who dedicated their lives to the service of their master. When Aksamuk the king fell before the god warriors of the Sun Empress and Icathia became a vassal state of Shurima, every one of them fell upon their swords. But the Kohari are reborn, rising to serve the new Mage King and reclaim their honor. I bear their sigil branded on my arm, the scroll-wrapped sword. My name is Aksamuk Varchoy Kohari Icathor. I repeat it over and over, holding on to what it represents. I do not want to forget it. It is all I have left. Was it only this morning I and the rest of the reformed Kohari marched through the streets of Icathia? It seems like a lifetime ago. The wide thoroughfares were thronged with thousands of cheering men, women, and children, clad in their brightest cloth and wearing their finest jewelry to honor our march. They had come to witness the rebirth of their kingdom. For it was Icathia that was reborn today, not just the Kohari. Our heads were high, my chest swollen with pride. We marched in step, gripping the leather straps of wicker shields and the wire-wound hilts of our curved Nimsha blades. To bear Icathian armaments had been forbidden under Shuriman law, but enough had been wrought in secret forges and hidden in caches throughout the city in readiness for the day of uprising. I remember that day very well. Well, just well. I added the very on my own. The city had been filled with screams as baying crowds chased down and murdered every Shuriman official they could find. Resentment for centuries of humiliating laws intended to eradicate our culture and brutal executions for breaking those laws came to a head in one blood-filled day of violence. It didn't matter that most of these people were merely scriveners, merchants, and takers. Pardon me. They were servants of the hated Sun Emperor and needed to die. Overnight, Icathia was ours again. Sun disk effigies were pulled from rooftops and smashed by cheering crowds. Shuriman scriptwork was burned and their treasuries looted. The statues of dead emperors were desecrated, and even I defaced one of the great frescoes with obscenities that would have made my mother blush. I remember the smell of smoke and fire. It was the smell of freedom. I held to that feeling as we marched. My memory recalled the smiling faces and the cheers, but I could not pick out any words. The sunlight was too bright, the noise too intense, and the pounding in my head unrelenting. I had not slept the previous night. Too nervous at the prospect of battle. My skill with the Nimsha was average, but I was deadly with the recurved serpent bow slung at my shoulder. Its wood was well seasoned, protected from the humidity by a coat of red lacquer. My arrows were fletched with azure raptor feathers, and I had carved their piercing heads from razored obsidian sourced from the thaumaturges, the magicas of earth and rock. Long runs through Icathia's lush coastal forests and along its high mountain trails had given me powerful, clean limbs to draw the bowstring and the stamina to fight all day. A young girl, her hair braided with silver wire, and with the deepest green eyes I had ever seen, placed a garland of flowers over my head. The scent of the blossoms was intoxicating, but I forgot it all as she pulled me close to kiss my lips. She wore a necklace, an opal set in swirling loop of gold, and I smiled as I recognized my father's craft. I tried to hold on to her, but our march carried me away. Instead, I fixed her face in my mind. I cannot remember it now, only her eyes, deep green like the forests of my youth. Is that Zyra? Or Nidalee? Zyra or Nidalee? Maybe. Soon, even that will be gone. Ivan? Easy, Aksa, said Sajax Kyle Rinks Kohari Ikathun, popping a freshly shelled egg into his mouth. She'll be waiting for you when this day is done. Hey, said Colgrim, Avel Essa Kohari Ikathun, jabbing his elbow into my side. Him and 20 other strapping young lads. I blushed at Colgrim's words and he laughed. Craft her a fine necklace from Shuriman gold, he continued. Then she'll be yours forever, or at least until morning. I should have said something to berate Colgrim for slighting this girl's honor, but I was young and eager to prove myself to these veteran warriors. Sajax was the beating heart of the Kohari, a shaven-headed giant with skin pockmarked by the ravages of childhood illness, and a forked beard stiffened to points with wax and white chalk. Colgrim was his right hand, a brute with cold eyes and a betrothal tattoo, though I had never heard him talk of his wife. These men had grown up together, and had learned the secret ways of the warrior since they were old enough to hold a blade. But I was new to this life. My father had trained me as a lapidary, an artisan of gemstones and a maker of jewelry. A meticulous and fastidious man, such coarse language was anathema to him, and unfamiliar to me. I relished it, of course, eager to fit in with these leather-tough men. I relished it, of course, eager to fit in with these leather-tough men. Go easy on the lad, Colgrim, said Syjax, slapping my back with one of his massive hands. Meant as a brotherly pat, it rattled the teeth in my skull, but I welcomed it all the same. He'll be a hero by nightfall. He shifted the long, axe-headed polearm slung at his shoulder. The weapon was immense. I apologize. Its ebony haft carved with the names of his forebears, and the blade a slab of razor-edged bronze. Few of our group could even lift it, let alone swing it, but Jax was a master of weapons. Imagine if I had a real weapon. Okay. All right. Starting to connect some of the dots, yeah? I turned to catch a last glimpse of my green-eyed girl, but could not see her amid the tightly packed ranks of soldiers and the waving arms of the crowds. Time to focus, Aksa, said Jax. The scryers say the Shurimans are less than half a day's march from Icathia. Are the god warriors with them? I asked. So they say, lad, so they say. Is it wrong that I can't wait to see them? Jax shook his head. No, for they are mighty. But as soon as you do, you'll wish you hadn't. I did not understand Jax's meaning and said, why? He gave me a sidelong glance. Because they are monsters. Have you seen one? I was filled with youthful enthusiasm, but I still remember the look that passed between Jax and Colgrim. I have, Aksa, said Jax. We fought one at Zek. We had to topple half the mountain to put the big bastard down, Colgrim added. And even then, only Jax had a weapon big enough to take its head off. I remembered the tale with a thrill of excitement. That was you? Jax nodded but said nothing, and I knew to ask no more. The corpse had been paraded around the newly liberated city for all to see, proof that the Shuriman's god warriors could still die. My father had not wanted me to see it, fearing it would inflame the desire to rebel that had smoldered in every Icathian heart for centuries. The memory of exactly what it looked like is gone now, but I remember it was enormous beyond belief, inhuman and terrible. I would see the god warriors later that day, and then I understood Jax's meaning. We formed up on the gentle slopes before the crumbling remains of the city walls. Since the coming of the Sun Empress over 1,000 years ago, we have been forbidden to reclaim the stone or rebuild the wall, forced to leave the rubble as a reminder of our ancient defeat. But now an army of stone wrights, laborers and thaumaturges were hefting giant blocks of freshly hewn granite into place with windlass mechanisms that crackled with magic. I felt pride at the sight of the rising walls. Icathia was being reborn in glory right before my eyes. More immediately impressive was the army taking position athwart the hard-packed earthen road leading into the city. 10,000 men and women, clad in armor of boiled leather and armed with axes, picks, and spears. The forgers had worked day and night to produce swords, shields, and arrowheads in the days following the uprising, but there was only so much that could be produced before the Sun Emperor turned his gaze upon this rebellious satrapy and marched east. I had seen pictures of ancient Icathian armies in the forbidden texts, brave warriors arrayed in serried, in ranks of gold and silver, and though were a shadow of such forces, we were no less proud. 2,000 Talon riders were deployed on either flank, their scaled and feathered mounts snorting and stamping clawed hooves with impatience. 1,000 archers knelt in two long lines, 50 feet ahead of us, blue-fledged shafts planted in the soft loam before them. 3 blocks of deep-ranked infantry formed the bulk of our line, a bulwark of courage to repel our ancient oppressors. All down our line, crackling energies from the earthcraft of our mages made the air blurry. The Shrimans would surely bring mages, but we could counter their power with magic of our own. I've never seen so many warriors, I said. Colgrim shrugged. None of us have, not in our lifetimes. Don't get too impressed, said Jax. The Sun Emperor has 5 armies, and even the least of them will outnumber us 3-1. I tried to imagine such a force and failed. How do we defeat such a host? I asked. Jax did not answer me, but led the Kohari to our place in the line before a stepped structure of granite blocks. Shuriman corpses were impaled upon wooden stakes, driven into the earth at its base, and flocks of carrion birds circled overhead. A silken pavilion of crimson and indigo had been raised at its summit, but I could not see what lay within. Robed priests surrounded it, each one weaving intricate patterns in the air with their star metal staves. I did not know what they were doing, but I heard an insistent, buzzing sound like a hive of insects trying to push their way into my skull. The pavilion's outline rippled like a desert mirage, and I had to look away as my eyes began to water. My teeth felt loose in their gums, and my mouth filled with the taste of soured milk. I gagged and wiped the back of my hand across my lips, surprised and not a little alarmed to see a smear of blood there. What is that? I asked. What's in there? Jax shrugged. A new weapon, I heard. Something the thaumaturges found deep underground after the earthquake at Sabira. What kind of weapon? Does it matter? Said Colgrim. They say it's going to wipe the gold-armored dung-eaters from the world, even those thrice-damned god warriors. The sun was close to its zenith by now, but a shiver worked its way down my spine. My mouth was suddenly dry. I could feel tingling in my fingertips. Was it fear? Perhaps. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a premonition of what was to come. An hour later, the Shuriman army arrived. I had never seen such a host, nor ever imagined so many men could be gathered together in one place. Columns of dust created clouds that rose like a gathering storm set to sweep the mortal realm away. And then, through the dust, I saw the bronze spears of the Shuriman warriors, filling my sight in all directions. They marched forward, a vast line of fighting men with golden banners and sun disk totems glimmering in the noonday sun. From the slopes above, we watched wave after wave come into sight, tens of thousands of men who had never known defeat and whose ancestors had conquered the known world. Riders on golden mounts rode the flanks as hundreds of floating chariots roved the head of the army. Heavy wagons, the size of river barks, bore strange war machines that resembled navigational astrolabes. Spinning globes orbited by flaming spheres and crackling lightning. Robed priests came with them, each with a flame-topped staff and an entourage of blinded slaves. At the heart of the army were the god warriors. Much else fades from my mind, the blood, the horror, and the fear, but the sight of the god warriors will follow me into whatever lies beyond this moment. I saw 9 of them, towering over the men they led. Their features and bodies were an awful blend of human and animal, and things that had never walked this world and never should. Armored in bronze and jade, they were titans, inhuman monsters that defied belief. So my guess with this would be like Nasus and Renekton, Azir. Because we're talking about the Sun Empress, right? So it's not Azir. He's not the Emperor during all of this. Their leader, with skin as pale and smooth as ivory, turned her monstrous head towards us, enclosed in a golden helm carved to resemble a roaring lion. Her face was mercifully hidden, but I could feel her power as she swept her scornful gaze across our line. A palpable wave of terror followed in its wake. Our army shrank from the scale of the enemy force, on the brink of fleeing before even a single blow was struck. Steadying shouts arose from our brave leaders, and an immediate rout was halted, but even I could hear the fear in their voices. I, too, felt an almost uncontrollable urge to avoid my bladder, but clamped down on the feeling. I was Kohari. I wouldn't piss myself in my first battle. Even so, my hands were clammy, and I felt a sickening knot forming in my gut. I wanted to run. I needed to run. We could not possibly stand against such a force. "Big bastards, aren't they?" said Colgrim, and nervous laughter rippled through our ranks. My fear lessened. "They may look like gods," said Sai Jax, his voice carrying far and wide, "but they are mortal. They can bleed and they can die." Oh, this is taken from Predator. I took strength from his words, but I wonder now if he knew just how wrong he was. "We are Icathians," he roared. "We are the heirs of the kings and queens who first settled this land. It is ours by right and by birth. Hey, we are outnumbered, but the warriors our enemies have sent are slaves and men whose only loyalty is to coin." He raised his weapon high, and the sunlight shone from its polished blade. He was glorious in that moment, and I would have followed him to the very end of the world if he asked me to. We fight to live in freedom, not in slavery. This is our home, and it is land of proud people, of free people. There is nothing stronger than that, and we will prevail. A cheer began in the Kohari ranks and was swiftly carried to the other regiments in our army. Icathia! 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 It echoed from the rising walls of our city and was carried to the Shuriman host. The god warriors spoke swiftly to their attendants, who turned and ran to bear their orders to the wings of the army. Almost immediately, our enemy began to move uphill. They came slowly, their pace deliberate. On every third step, the warriors hammered their hafts of their spears on their shields. The noise was profoundly unnerving, a slow drumbeat that sapped the will of we who were soon to feel the tips of those blades. My mouth was dry, my heart hammered in my chest. I looked to Sijax for strength, to take courage from his indomitable presence. His jaw was set, his eyes hard. This was a soul who knew no fear, who rejected doubt and stood firm in the face of destiny. Sensing my gaze, he glanced down at me. "Egg?" he said. A pair of peeled eggs lay in the palm of his hand. I shook my head. I couldn't eat. Not now. "I'll take an egg," said Colgrim, taking one and biting it in half. Sijax ate the other, and the pair of them chewed thoughtfully. The Shurimans drew ever closer. "Good egg," noted Colgrim. "I add a dash of vinegar as I boil them," Sijax replied. "Makes them easier to peel." "Clever." "Thanks." I looked back and forth between them, unable to reconcile the mundane nature of the words as an all-conquering army marched upon us, and yet I felt soothed by it. I laughed, and that laughter swiftly spread. The Kohari were laughing, and soon, without knowing why, our entire army was laughing. The fear that had threatened to undo us all now fled. Fresh resolve filled our hearts and put iron in our sword arms. The Shurimans halted 200 yards from us. I tasted a strange texture to the air, like biting on tin. I looked up in time to see the spinning globes on the war machines burn with searing light. The priests attending them swept their staves down. One of the flaming spheres detached from the globe and arced through the air towards us. It landed in the midst of our infantry and burst in an explosion of pellucid green fire and screams. Another sphere followed, then another. I gagged as the smell of roasting flesh billowed from the ranks, horrified at the carnage being wrought, but our warriors held firm. More of the spheres arced towards us, but instead of striking our ranks, they wobbled in the air before reversing course to smash down in the heart of the Shuriman spearmen. Amazed, I saw our thaumaturges holding their staves aloft, and crackling lines of magic flickered between them. The hairs on my arms and legs stood up in the shimmering air, as if a veil was being drawn up around us. More of the searing fireballs launched from the Shuriman war machines, but they exploded in mid-air, striking the invisible barrier woven around our force. Cheers overcame the cries of pain in our ranks. I let out a breath, thankful that I had not been among the war machine's targets. I watched those piteously wounded men dragged to the rear by their comrades. The temptation to remain there must have been tremendous, but we Icathians descend from explorer kings, and not a single warrior failed to return to their place in the battle line. The strain on our mages was clear, but their power was holding the Shuriman barrage at bay. I glanced over my shoulder to the pavilion atop the pyramid. There, too, the priests were straining with all their power. To what end, I could not imagine. What manner of weapon lay within, and when would we unleash it? "Stand to," said Syjax, and I returned to my attention to the army before us. "They'll come at us now, a big wave to test us." I looked back at the Shurimans, who now came at us in a run. Arrows flashed from the lines of archers ranged before us, and scores of enemy warriors died. Bronze plate and shield saved some, but the range was so close that many fell with shafts punched clean through their breastplates. Another volley hammered the Shurimans, swiftly followed by another. Hundreds were down. Their line was ragged and disorganized. "Now!" roared Syjax. "Into them!" Our infantry surged forward in a wedge, spears lowering as they charged. I was carried by the mass of men behind me, managing to drag my blade from its sheath as I ran. I screamed to keep my fear at bay, worrying that I might trip on my scabbard. I saw the faces of Shurimans, the braids in their hair, the gold over their crests, and the blood smearing their tunics. We were so close, I could have whispered and they might have heard me. We struck their wavering ranks like thunderbolt. Spears thrust and shivered, hafts splintering with the impact. Driven by sheer will and 1,000 years of pent-up anger, the momentum of our charge clove deep into their ranks, splitting them and breaking their formation completely. Anger gave me strength, and I swung my sword. It bit into flesh, and blood sprayed me. I heard screaming. It might have been me. I cannot say for sure. I tried to stay close to Syjax and Colgrim, knowing that where they fought, Shurimans would be dying. I saw Syjax felling men by the dozen with his huge polearm, but could no longer see Colgrim. I soon lost sight of Syjax in the heave and sway of surging warriors. I called his name, but my shout was drowned in the roar of battle. Bodies slammed into me, pulling at me, clawing my face. Icathian hands or Shuriman, I had no idea. A spear stabbed towards my heart, but the tip slid from my breastplate to slice across my arm. I remember pain, but little else. I hammered my sword into a screaming man's face. He fell, and I pushed on, made fearless by fear and savage joy. I roared and swung my sword like a madman. Skill was meaningless. I was a butcher hacking meat. This is Garon? Are we reading this from a perspective of Garon? Sorry. I saw men die whose skill was much greater than mine. I kept moving, lost in the swirling tide of flesh and bone. Wherever I saw an exposed neck or back, I struck. I took grim pleasure in my killing. Whatever the outcome of this day, I could hold my head high in the company of warriors. More arrows flew overhead, and the cheers rising from our army were songs of freedom. And then the Shurimans broke. It began as a single slave warrior turning his back and running, but his panic spread like fire on the plain, and soon the whole formation was streaming back down the hill. In the days leading up to this moment, Syjax had told me that the most dangerous moment for any warrior is when a regiment breaks. That is when the killing truly begins. We tore through the rooted Shurimans, spears plunging into exposed backs and axes splitting skulls. They were no longer fighting back, simply trampling one another to escape. The bloodshed was appalling, yet I reveled in it, as hundreds of bodies were crushed in the slaughter. I saw Syjax again, then standing firm, his polearm at his side. "Hold!" he yelled. "Hold!" I wanted to curse his timidity. Our blood was up, and the Shurimans were fleeing in panic. I did not know it at the time, but Syjax had seen how dangerous our position truly was. "Pull back!" he shouted, and the cry was taken up by others who saw what he had seen. At first, it seemed our army would not heed his words, drunk on victory and eager to plunge onward. We were intent on slaying every one of the enemy, wreaking vengeance upon soldiers who had held our land hostage for centuries. I had not seen the danger, but all too soon I understood. Screams and fountains of blood sheeted from the leading edges of our battle line. Severed heads flew backwards, spinning like rocks skipped over a pool. Bodies soon followed, tossed aside without effort. Screams and cries of terror erupted, and the songs of freedom were snuffed out. The God Warriors had entered the fray. Three of them surged into our ranks, some moving like men, others like ravenous beasts. Each was armed with a weapon larger than any man could lift, unstoppable and invincible. They waded through our ranks with sweeping blows that slew a dozen men with every swing. Icathians flew in pieces from their crackling blades, were crushed beneath their tread, or were rent asunder like bloodied rags. "Back!" shouted Syjax. "Back to the walls!" None could pierce the God Warriors' armor, and their ferocity was so primal, so inhuman, that it froze me to the spot. Spears snapped against their iron-hard hides, and their bellowing roars cut me to the marrow with terror. One, a cawing beast with ragged feathered wings and a vulture-like beak, leapt into the air, searing blue fire blaze from its outstretched claws. I cried out at the sight of my fellow countrymen burned to ash. The elation that had, only moments before, filled us with thoughts of victory and glory, now shattered like a falling glass. In its place, I felt a sick horror of torments yet to come, the retribution of an unimaginably cruel despot who knows no mercy. I felt a hand grab my shoulder and lifted my bloodied blade. "Move, Axa," said Syjax, forcing me back. "There's still fighting to be done." I was dragged along by the force of his grip, barely able to keep my feet. I wept as we streamed back to where we had first formed up. Our line was broken, and surely the day was lost. But the God Warrior simply stood among the dead, not even bothering to pursue. "You said we had a weapon," I cried. "Why aren't they doing anything?" "They are," said Syjax. "Look!" What happened next defies my understanding. No mortal eye had ever seen such a thing. The pavilion exploded with forking traceries of light. Arcing loops of purple energy ripped into the sky and lashed down like crashing waves. The force of the blast threw everyone to the ground. I covered my ears as a deafening scream tore the air. I pressed myself to the battle-churned earth as the wail burrowed deep into my skull. as though the world itself was shrieking in horror. I rolled onto my side, retching as stabbing nausea ripped through my belly. The sky, once bright and blue, was now the color of a week-old bruise. Unnatural twilight held sway, and I saw flickering afterimages burn themselves onto the back of my mind. Slashing claws, gaping maws, all-seeing eyes. I sobbed in terror at the sight of such horrors. Alone of all the things being stripped from me, this I gladly surrender. A nightmarish light, sickly blue and ugly purple, smothered the world, pressing down from above and blooming up from somewhere far below. I pushed myself upright, turning in a slow circle as the world ended around me. The Shirimans were streaming back from the city, terrified by whatever force our priest had unleashed. My enemies were being destroyed, and I knew I should be triumphal, but this was not a victory any sane person could revel in. This was extinction. An abyss that bled purple light tore open amid the Shirimans, and I saw their ivory-skinned general overcome by whipping cords of matter. She fought to free herself with wild sweeps of her blade, but the power we had unleashed was too much for her. The pulsing, glowing light spread over her body like a hideous cocoon. Everywhere I looked, I saw the same slick coils rising from the earth, or from the very air itself. To seize the flesh of mortals, men and women were swept up and enveloped. I saw one Shuriman clawing his way over the earth, his body seeming to dissolve as the tendrils of foul energy overwhelmed him. I began to hope, to pray that this doom was what had been planned all along. I saw shapes in the flickering light, too fast and indistinct to make out clearly, stretching, swelling limbs of strange tar-like matter. Men were clawed from their feet and pulled apart. I heard the gurgling, hooting bellows of things never meant to walk the surface of this world. As awful as this day had become, I wondered if this was the price of the great weapon our priest had unleashed. I hardened my heart to the suffering of the Shirimans and remembered the centuries of misery that they heaped upon us. Once again, I had lost sight of Syjax and Colgrim, but I no longer needed their presence to steady me. I had proved myself worthy of my grandsire's name, worthy of the brand on my arm. I was Kohari. The sky groaned and buckled, sounding like a vast sailcloth tearing in a storm. I turned and ran back to the city, joining up with the other soldiers. I saw the same desperate, horrified looks on their faces I knew must be upon mine. Had we won? None of us knew. The Shirimans were gone, swallowed whole by the terror we had unleashed upon the world. I felt no regret, no remorse. My horror had given way to justification. I had lost my Nimsha blade somewhere in the frenzy of the battle, so I took my bow from my shoulder and pumped it to the sky. "Icathia!" I yelled. "Icathia!" The chant was taken up again by the soldiers around me, and we stopped to watch the enemy finally overcome. The seething mass of matter that had consumed them lay like a shroud over the flesh it had consumed. Its surface was undulant, and swelling blisters of glistening matter burst open with frothing birth sacs that twisted and unfolded like newborn animals. I turned as I heard a deafening grinding of rock. Booming cracks echoed as more and more chasms tore the landscape open. I dropped to my knees as the earth shook, and the walls of Icathia, fallen once and now rising again, were shattered by a groaning bass note that split the earth. Gazes of dust and smoke erupted from within the city. I saw men screaming, but could not hear them over the crash of falling rock and splitting earth. Towers and palaces that had stood since the first mage king planted his star metal staff were swallowed whole by ever-widening chasms. Only rubble and shattered fragments remained, my beloved city reduced to a charred skeleton. Fire spat skyward, and the wails of my people were somehow magnified by the canyons of the city as they fell into hideous doom below. "Icathia!" I cried, one last time. I saw a flash of movement and flinched as something flew through the air above me. I recognized the vulture-headed god warrior from earlier in the battle. Its flight was erratic, its limbs already partially ruined and unmade by the strange matter spilling from the rents in the earth. It flew towards the pavilion with desperate beats of its ravaged wings, and I knew I had to stop it. I ran towards the towering creature, knocking an obsidian-tipped arrow to my bow. The thing stumbled as it landed. Its legs were twisted and its back was alive with devouring tendrils. Feathers and skin sloughed from its head as it limped past the bodies of dead priests, whose own flesh bubbled and roiled with internal motion. Fire built around the god warrior's hands, ready to burn the pavilion with the last of its power. Jax had said the Sun Emperor had more armies, and we would need our weapon intact if we were to defeat them. I drew back the bowstring, an obsidian arrow aimed at the god warrior. I loosed, and the arrow sped true, punching through the dissolving matter of its skull. The god warrior fell, and the fire faded from its hands. It rolled onto its side, the flesh falling from its bones. I saw threads of sinewy, pallid matter forming beneath. The god warrior sensed my presence and turned his vulturine head to me. One of its eyes was milky and distended by growths of strange fungus-like substance spreading across its skull. The other had my arrow protruding through it. "Do you even know what you have done, foolish Icathian?" the blind god warrior managed, its voice a wet growl of dissolving vocal cords. I sought to think of some powerful words, something to mark the moment I had killed a god warrior. All I could think of was the truth. "We freed ourselves," I said. "You have opened the door to a place that should never be opened," it hissed. "You have doomed us all." "Time for you to die," I said. The god warrior tried to laugh, but what came out was a gurgling death rattle. "Die? No. What is to come will be far worse. It will be as if none of us ever existed." Wow. I left the arrow embedded in the god warrior's skull. I left the arrow embedded in the god warrior's skull. Men were limping back from the battle, bloodied and weary, with the same look of incredulous horror in their eyes. None of us truly understood what had happened, but the Shurimans were dead, and that was enough. Wasn't it? We milled in confusion, none of us knowing what to say or do. The landscape before the city was twisting with unnatural motion. The flesh of the Shuriman army utterly obscured by pale coiling ropes of hideous matter. Its surface was darkening as I watched, splitting where it hardened like some form of carapace. Vicious ichor spilled out, and more I had the impression that this was just the beginning of something far worse. Light still spilled from the colossal rent torn in the ground, and alien sounds, a mix of shrieking, hissing, and crazed howls, echoed from far below. I could feel tremors rising up from the bowels of the earth, like the slow grinding of a bedrock that presages in an earthquake. "What's down there?" said a man I didn't know. His arm was all but encased in a translucent cowl that was slowly creeping its way up the side of his neck. I wonder if he knew. "Sounds like a nest, or a lair, or something." I did not know what hideous things lived down there, nor did I want to. I heard a voice call my name, and I looked up to see Syjax limping toward me. His face was a mask of blood, thanks to a jagged wound that ran from above his right eye to his jawline. I hadn't thought Syjax could bleed at all. "You're hurt," I said. "It's worse than it looks." "Is this the end?" I asked him. "For Icathia, I fear it is," he replied, moving away to grab the bridle of cavalryman's mount. The beast was skittish, but Syjax hauled its reins and vaulted into the saddle. "I would have given everything to see the Shurmans defeated," I murmured. "I fear we just did," said Syjax. "But we won." "The Shurimans are dead, but I'm not sure that's the same thing," said Syjax. "Now find the mount. We have to go." "Go? What are you talking about?" "Icathia is doomed," he said. "You see that, don't you? Not just the city, but our land. Look around you. That will be our fate too." I knew he was right, but the idea of simply riding away, I didn't know if I could. "Icathia is my home," I said. "There is nothing left of Icathia, or at least there won't be soon." He extended his hand to take mine, and I shook it. "Axa," he said, casting a glance back at the creeping horror. "There is no hope here." I shook my head and said, "I was born here, and I will die here." "Then hold to who you are while you still can, lad," he said, and I felt the weight of his sadness and guilt. "It is all you have left." Syjax turned his mount and rode away. I never saw him again. My name is Aksamuk Varchoy Kohari Icathor. I think. I think Aksamuk was my grandsire's name. It has meaning, but I can no longer remember what. I wandered the ruins where a great city once stood. All that is left is an impossibly wide crater, rubble and a tear in the fabric of the world. I feel a terrible emptiness before me. Aksamuk was a king, I think. I do not remember where. Was it here, in this ruined, sunken city? I do not know what Var or Choi mean. Icathor should have meaning to me, but whatever it was, is gone. There is terrible void where my mind and memories once dwelled. My name is Aksamuk Varchoy Kohari. Kohari. What is that? There is a mark on my arm, a sword wrapped in a scroll. Is it a slave mark? Was I the property of a conqueror? I remember a girl with green eyes and an opal necklace. Who was she? Was she my wife? My sister? A daughter? I do not know, but I remember the smell of her flowers. My name is Aksamuk Varchoy. I repeat it over and over, holding on to it, as if it can stave off this slow dissolution. I do not want to forget it. It is all I have left. My name is Aksamuk. I am being erased. I know this, but I do not know why or how. Something awful writhes within me. All that I am is unraveling. I am being undone. My name. My goodness. That was, wow. That was honestly really, really insane. Holy moly, man. And here at the end we see that Jax is a part of the story. Side Jax was indeed Jax. It must be Jax. And Zillion, I'm not sure how he's related, but we will find that out eventually. No spoilers, guys. Honestly, I just want to continue, man. This is a lot of fun, you know? But I don't want to ruin the novelty of it all. I think doing this once weekly is definitely the way. So we found out about Aurelian Soul and the Void, and how the Void was brought into the picture, and how it defeated the army of Shurima, because Shurima enslaved what I think is the whole continent. that was just honestly, like at the point where I realized that side Jax was Jax, I was like, ooh, here's to you, kid. And then when I there was one the god that he killed with the bow and the arrow and the eye. Good that they gave him a flame attack so we can't confuse him with Azir, right? Wow. Yeah, time to spam Jackson solo queue? Definitely, man. How hype was this? This was on a whole nother level. So this was... so, if anything, this is still in the beginning, right? This is still very, very early on. We will just have to see. We'll just have to see what comes next. I imagine going to Zillion next makes sense. Because he comes from Icathia, that's something that I know. And like his whole cult is like legit, you know. I think the entire character is about stopping the void from ever coming, the Chrono Keeper. There is no greater grief than for a loss that is yet to come. Whew. Yeah. Till next one.